And thank you, Mr. Khan, for those inspiring remarks. I'm sure we will all take them to heart. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, it would be my enormous pleasure and honor to welcome to the podium the laureate of this year's Václav Havel Human Rights Prize, Vladimir Kara-Murza. Over the years, Vladimir and I have had a number of opportunities to discuss human rights and current issues in private and in public, and I terribly miss his eloquence, his passionate dedication, and his human warmth. Alas, as you know, Vladimir is in prison and will be represented here by his wife, Evgenia. However, as you will hear for yourself, Evgenia is no substitute, but a full partner to Vladimir and his endeavors, someone who shares a large part of the burden he has to carry, even if it is not as immediately visible. So, Evgenia, please join me on the podium. Once again.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Please. Evgenia, thank you for being with us. I know these are very busy and not very easy times for you. And we appreciate your presence here even more for that. I will start with the question that has been much on my mind over the last few days. How is Vladimir? How is he treated? Do you hear from him? And what do you know about the plans of the prosecution for him?
Thank you so very much for your kind words, for your introduction, and I just want to say how, what a great honor it is for me to be here, and how humbling and emotional it is for me to be sitting here in these amazing surroundings in front of this distinguished audience. I actually was in this beautiful church once before with Vladimir. That was during the Forum 2000 in Prague. And of course, he was here on stage. And I was up there on the balcony listening to him speak. And every time he speaks, I mean, I've been married to the guy for over 20 years. And every time he speaks, I'm in awe like a little girl. And I cannot not believe every word he says because he believes in it deeply. And he works for it, not just a bystander, but he actually, well, I share my life with someone brilliant, and I do realize that. I am very, happy today, but happy in a sort, because every time I get something from him, it's like I can hear his voice, and that makes me happy. Because when he was awarded the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize in Strasbourg, his lawyer was at the pretrial detention center. He was just about to enter the pretrial detention center, so I sent him a message saying that Vladimir did actually receive the award. And so Vladimir already knows the news. And he was able to write something for you. That is his beautiful handwriting. That I am one of the rarest people to be able to decipher. But so I'm very happy that I can read this for you today, because I believe that his voice needs to be heard today in this beautiful church, at this beautiful event. So, Ambassador Žantovský, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is always a pleasure for me to greet friends in Prague, even if for now I'm not able to join you in person. This city has a special place in the history of the Russian human rights movement, as does the year that was a defining moment in the life of Václav Havel, 1968. That August, as Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia to crush the Prague Spring, the Kremlin went to great lengths to put up a show of universal public support in the Soviet Union for the invasion. All across the country, trade unions, workers' collectives, academic institutes, party committees, cultural associations passed resolutions of approval. Soviet newspapers reported that support for the invasion was unanimous. But then, one afternoon that August, 7 people came out onto Red Square in Moscow in a silent demonstration of protest. Their banners read, "Down with the occupiers" and "For your freedom and ours, za vašu i našu svobodu." They weren't there even 5 minutes. They were beaten, arrested, and herded away almost immediately. But after what they did, no one could say that there was unanimous support in the Soviet Union for the invasion of Czechoslovakia. As one of the 7, Natalia Grabanievskaya, a poet, later said, "A nation minus me is no longer an entire nation." More than half a century later, the situation is strikingly similar. The Kremlin has once again sent its troops to subdue a proud sovereign nation, and once again it claims universal support in Russia for its actions. Too often, the world takes this at face value. But just as in 1968, it is not true. And today there are not 7, but thousands of Russians who have spoken out against this aggression. Around 19,000, to be more precise. This is the number of people detained by police for anti-war protests since Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Dozens of us are now imprisoned for it. Journalists, lawyers, priests, politicians, teachers, artists, military officers, people of different backgrounds and different vocations who could not stay silent in the face of this atrocity, even at the cost of personal freedom. It is my hope that the free world hears these Russian voices too, because a nation minus us is no longer an entire nation. It is to all these courageous Russians that I want to dedicate my 2022 Václav Havel Human Rights Prize. And the monetary part of the prize will go towards creating a special fund to support the families of Russian political prisoners, families that now have to live without their spouses, their parents, or their children, because their loved ones have refused to be complicit in the evil perpetrated by their government. I am profoundly grateful to the Václav Havel Library, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, the government of the Czech Republic, and the Hartia 77 Foundation for this incredible honor. And I look forward to being back here in Prague soon, when a peaceful, democratic, and Putin-free Russia rejoins the European family. I have no doubt that this day will come. As Havel himself said, the only lost cause is one we give up on before we enter the struggle. And the cause of a free and democratic Russia is one that none of us are ever willing to give up on.
Well, thank you, Evgenia, and thank you, Vladimir. It's incredibly moving. Evgenia, it takes almost superhuman courage to stand up alone against a brutish dictatorial regime such as the Putin's regime in Russia. What made Vladimir to join the struggle? What keeps him fighting? What gives him the strength? What makes him tick? You should know better than anyone else.
Sometimes I wonder. No, honestly, well, Vladimir is a person of integrity. This is what I think about when I think about integrity. It is someone to whom honesty is absolutely crucial, and honesty, first of all, to himself. he has for a very long time identified himself as a Russian politician. So to him, he needs to be where people are actively fighting the regime. As a Russian politician, as someone who wants to bring change to our country, I think he believes that his place is on the forefront of that struggle. He has to share the same risks and the same responsibilities, the same risks faced by Russians back home. And I think that Vladimir has, if we look at the documentaries that Vladimir has produced over the years, his first documentary was on Soviet dissidents. They chose freedom. The second one was on Boris Nemtsov. The third one was on Father Georgy Edelstein, a Soviet dissident who hates being called a dissident because he identifies himself as a priest, someone who tells the truth. So all those people whom Vladimir read about, learned about, all these people, I think, contributed to him becoming who he is today. Vladimir is a historian, and he believes that it is often thanks to the struggle of those people that we can keep hoping today, because the most atrocious dictatorial regimes still can be fought if you refuse to stay silent, if you find something to do. I mean, maybe it is scary. Well, scary. Vladimir was poisoned twice, and both times he was in a coma with a multiple organ failure. In 2015, our oldest was 9 at the time. And then I had a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old in my arms, as well as Vladimir, because he could not walk. And for several months after the poisoning, I had to carry him around. And I cannot even imagine how traumatizing it was for our kids to see their father, a very capable, grown-up man, the very capable father, the most intelligent person they've known in their lives, be carried around by their mom. He had to relearn how to use a spoon, how to button his shirts. He still cannot button his shirts. But sometimes I wonder, maybe he just likes me buttoning his shirts for him. The second time it happened in 2017. Again, a multiple organ failure, coma, months of relearning how to carry out the simplest tasks. And then he would stand up, and he would pack his bags, and he would go back. I was terrified. Terrified. I still am. I mean, now he's facing up to 24 years of strict regime, because in the eyes of this government, anyone who opposes the war, the brutal war on Ukraine, anyone who calls for sanctions against those criminals in the regime, anyone who stands up for political prisoners, is seen as a traitor. Mm-hmm. So it is absolutely, it is frightening, but I also see his resolve. I see how much he believes that if all of us, each of us, will do something, we will be able to face the evil, and we will be able to bring it down. And so it's not, there is no pathos in it for him. He doesn't do it because, as this great example for others to follow. No, he's just doing his part. He's just being one person refusing to stay silent. And for that, I have my deepest admiration and my deepest respect for him. And this is why, for a while, we've stopped talking about him, going back to Russia. But I know that he will. I know that this is his country. I've known for many years that he would stand up and he would go. And I learned to accept this.
Thank you. You just touched upon my next question. In the current situation, some people understandably expected us to award the prize to an Ukrainian human rights defender or an organization. But we both know how closely connected the two things are. Tell us about the importance of the domestic Russian opposition to the aggression against Ukraine, and how important it is, and how do you see the chances that it might affect the domestic situation in Russia?
First of all, I just want to say how absolutely devastating this war is for myself, our family, so many people that I know, and how amazed and in what awe I am before the Ukrainian people, before this great nation that refuses to be subdued, that is prepared and willing to fight to the end. They're amazing. And I believe that the 5 a.m. coalition is doing an incredibly important work right now, documenting all those crimes, because this will be the basis for prosecution against those committing war crimes and against those responsible for launching this war of aggression against the sovereign country. But as Vladimir has always said, internal repression always leads to external aggression. And what we're seeing today is the result of over 2 decades of impunity that Vladimir Putin has enjoyed while oppressing his own people and carrying out his other military campaigns in Chechnya, in Georgia, annexing Crimea, bombing Syria, all of that with no serious repercussions for himself or the regime that he's built. So of course he ended up believing that he could get away with anything. I mean, it's pretty logical. Look at it from his side, from his point of view. If he can annex Crimea, why can't he go and annex the rest of Ukraine? If he can bomb civilians in Syria, why can't he do the same in Ukraine? And Vladimir has been working, advocating for the introduction of the Magnitsky legislation in different countries around the world since 2010. That's over 10 years of trying to convince Western governments to adopt the legislation that would allow us to go after those who have been implicated in gross human rights violations, in those who have been part of this regime and have been aiding and abetting this regime, stealing from the Russian population and hiding that money in the West using Western banking sector, Western financial systems. Over 10 years of trying to convince the world that internal repression, what Vladimir Putin was doing to the Russian people, will lead to external aggression. I mean, and we've seen this, all these other military campaigns. And, well, if we talk about opposition in Russia, Vladimir mentioned in his letter, since February, around 19,000 people have been detained in Russia. Would I wish there were millions? I would. But I think that it is very difficult to assess the state of mind of the majority of the Russian population in the absence of free elections, in the absence of free polling systems, in the absence of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, with stolen elections, all of that. And yet, despite all the measures, all the draconian measures thrown at them, people continue protesting. And it's true that an incredible number of people left the country. Many of those people are independent journalists, because since February, the remaining 3 independent media outlets in Russia, Dost TV, Echo of Moscow radio station, and Novaya Gazeta, have all been forced to either suspend their activities or close down. They left Russia, but they continue their very important work from outside. Human rights organizations have been forced to do the same, because anyone who's doing any important work in Russia is designated as a foreign agent or an undesirable organization. And again, despite all of that, people continue protesting and people continue working. These journalists are producing the informational content to be delivered to the population in Russia. And the number of VPN services installed in Russia since the blockade of everything is skyrocketing, which shows that there is demand for that information. And the Memorial Human Rights Center continues updating the lists of political prisoners in Russia, and that list is growing by the day. So all that shows that there is a very big number of Russians who refuse to stay silent, or who refuse to take to be complicit in the atrocities of the regime.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are running out of time a little, but I don't want to leave you without asking you my last question. As I said in the beginning, you are a full partner to Vladimir's efforts and consequently to this prize, mind you. Raising the family, having to deal with the publicity and the media, canvassing politicians and NGOs for the support that he so badly needs. How has it affected you personally, and how has it affected your 3 children and family?
Well, even when you enumerate the things that I need to do right now, I'm so out of my comfort zone. I cannot describe. But I really had no choice. This is my best friend. I am very lucky to be married to my best friend, to my partner. I've always thought of our marriage as a team, a partnership. This is the only way it works for me. So whenever I fell apart, he was always there to pick up the pieces and put them together. Whenever he needed help, I was always there for him, or at least I hope I was. So there really was no choice. I will continue doing this for as long as it takes me, because this is someone I love, and because when we fight for someone we love, we get incredible strength. I don't know, I don't think about how it affects me. I think about how it affects the kids, of course. And trying to be a mom in the middle of all of this is hard. So whenever I am home for like a couple of days, a month nowadays, I make sure to bake pancakes with my son, take him to his tennis lessons. I make sure to read books and visit with my kids and visit my daughter's dance lessons. I make sure to talk about with my oldest one, with her love life or whatever she wants to talk to me about. I try to do that because I am trying to both rescue him yet again so that he could continue his very important work, and I'm trying to be a mom in all of this.
Well, thank you, Evgenia, so much. I mean, this was an incredible experience, and let us give a big hand of applause to our guest, Evgenia. You were fantastic. For someone out of his comfort zone, you were incredible. And let me make a promise here, I think, on your behalf as well as on mine. We will not forget about you and Vladimir when you leave this stage. We will keep raising our voices and praying for Vladimir, and hopefully at the next year's conference or in 2 years, you both will come here to Prague, and we will have a great Czech-Russian dinner and talk about all things in life. Thank you, Evgenia.
Thank you very much.
And let me now give the floor to Linda Bartošová, a well-known TV journalist and presenter. Welcome, Linda. But also a dedicated social activist who will introduce and interview the representatives of this year's Václav Havel Human Rights Prize runners-up, Denis Rabomizo of the Ukrainian 5 AM Coalition, and Áaron Demeter of the Hungarian Rainbow Coalition. Gentlemen, please join Linda, and I'm off the stage.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just, for a start, express great, deep respect for you, Evgenia, for everything you do, for what you've said. I've become very emotional, so sorry for that, but I just wanted to really emphasize it because you're a great, courageous person, woman, so thank you very much. Let me just now introduce the speakers and nominees a little bit more than Mr. Žantovský. Thank you for that. The nominees of the 2022 Václav Havel Human Rights Prize. I would like to introduce first speaker, who is Áaron Demeter, representing human rights in Hungary. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Áaron Demeter is the head of research and communications at Amnesty International Hungary, the Hungarian section of the global human rights movement. He's leading the team of the thematic experts focusing on rule of law, gender equality, LGBTQI+ rights, and international cases. Áaron is also in charge of the external communication of the organization. So once again, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Second organization and second topic we will talk about in the following discussion is Ukraine 5 AM Coalition, represented by Denis Rabomizo. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ukraine 5 AM Coalition launched its activity the next day after the beginning of Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine, aiming to protect the victims of Russian armed aggression in Ukraine and try to bring to justice the top leadership of the Russian Federation and the direct perpetrators of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The coalition unites NGOs, initiatives, and individual experts, many of whom have extensive experience in documenting international crimes and human rights violations committed in the temporarily occupied territories of Crimea, parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions since 2014. To date, the coalition members are 30 NGOs and 4 experts in international law and human rights. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
We will now discuss the work of both organizations, let's say, and both personalities. But let me just emphasize for the start of the discussion that there will be plenty of time for you as well to ask. And we would really like to encourage you to ask in the end of the discussion. There will be a mic for you. If you just raise your hand, we will see you and you can ask anything. So let me start by both a quote and a subtitle of this conference, which is "The wheels of justice grind slow, but grind fine," by Sun Tzu. Denis, what comes to your mind when listening this quote, considering the situation in Ukraine? Do you still believe in justice?
To be honest, I still believe in justice, at least because I believe in Ukraine and Ukrainians. But I don't want to say that in our situation justice comes so fast as we wanted. So we are trying to at least to find the best solution for justice mechanism to bring to responsibility those who is responsible in war crimes, crimes against humanity. But at present stage, in spite of a lot of discussions and negotiations, everywhere. Even the last week we had one of the rounds of discussion, which is a better solution. We still haven't found it, but I think a lot of things depends on politicians, and I trust in Ukraine and Europe that, and even the United Nations, that these solutions will be found soon.
Mm-hmm. When I take the name of your organization or of your coalition, Ukraine 5 a.m. or Piata Ranku, it goes to the beginning of the invasion, as I assume.
That's right. We decided to put in the name of the coalition the time when the Russian missiles started shelling Ukrainian cities on 24th of February, and when the Russian troops started the full-scale invasion. And for this reason, it will always remind us about the goals which forced us to start this initiative.
Can you describe the beginnings of your work? Like, how did you organize the event? How did you start collecting all those evidence?
Actually, I think that we just started to communicate with colleagues, and it was a choice for us either you join military or you start your own fight. And in my personal situation, on the third day of invasion, I had the choice either to take an armor and go to fight, or to start using my knowledge and skills, which I have just to start our own fighting. And I sent messages to my colleagues and suggested to them that we have to start documentation of war crimes, since from my experience, when we documented war crimes committed by Russians after occupation of Crimean Peninsula, it was clear for me that there will be a lot of war crimes committed by Russians, including my experience of monitoring war crimes committed by Russians in Syria. And it was clear for me that the first step before we start any legal proceedings against Russians is that we need evidences, and we need to document war crimes. I sent messages to my colleagues on 26th of February, and almost from the first days of March, I have found that there is a group of public organizations which decided to unite between themselves, because it was clear for everybody that there is no organization in Ukraine which is able to cover everything, from documenting war crimes, covering them in the media, advocating important decisions for Ukraine nationally and abroad. And our force in the coalition is that we try to unite a lot of public organizations and experts which have different skills, but united by the same goals.
Can you describe the nature of the crimes you've collected evidence about so far?
Oh, there are a lot of crimes. Usually it's the most of them are intentional killing of civilians. It's violence against women. It's forced disappearance and torture. It's a looting.
Do you see anywhere in the future that Ukrainian people will also, with the help of your evidence, reach their justice?
I hope so. It's one of the tricky questions that we have at present stage, and we already started to identify those who is responsible in war in these crimes committed in Ukraine, but I would say it's very hard to identify everybody from Russian troops who is committing a particular war crime. But we are trying to do our best to identify all of them, and not just the top commanders of Russians.
Are you now in the phase of collecting and identifying, or even sending it to somewhere, or how does it work after you collect some evidence?
We started to collect evidences in March from documented war crimes on the basis of information that we collect. We have seen in the social media, in open source information, let's say. From April, we started to receive some information and evidences from victims and witnesses. And then when we collect enough information, depending on the sensitivity of information and evidences, we started to share them with European agencies, with the International Criminal Court, with enforcement agencies. Of course, some information contains a lot of personal information, especially in cases which relates to violence against women. But if it's possible, and for the sake of justice, we are trying to share this information with everybody who can help us to bring to the responsibility those who is responsible.
Can we, as a public, find this evidence somewhere? These
Do you mean database?
proofs? Yeah.
No, database at present stage is closed only, and only particular persons have access to this database since it contains personal information about victims and witnesses. But now we are working on creation of a database which will be to a particular level open to the public. And we hope that we will have a map of war crimes committed in Ukraine, and everybody can look at it and see what was happening in a particular region.
Let me allow one personal question. With all the evidence you have, how do you react to people, and there are people like this, who say that there is no war in Ukraine, or that it's not Russian-led aggression against Ukraine?
Actually, for these 7 months, I never met these persons. I had only one colleague from Latvia who, and it was in April, who sent me a message because we have communicated for one of his cases, and he asked me these personal questions. Is what happened in Bucha is true? Because I know that you are documenting war crimes, and say to him that it's true. And he told me that it's enough for him, because he told me that there are a lot of different information in Europe and in Russia especially was published that it's not Russians, it's Ukrainian fakes. And probably that is the only one case when I was asked about it.
We all saw the images from Bucha and everywhere else in Ukraine, but there are still people in Czech Republic, and I guess in other countries as well, who say this is not true, it's not happening. So what do you think is that, like, what's happening in their minds?
I think a lot about propaganda. I think that this is one of the major crime that is committed by Russians, and not only in particular our case, but also in case of colleagues from Rainbow Coalition, because we have to understand and duly evaluate the importance that Russian propaganda plays, not only in Russian, but also in Europe and worldwide. And for this reason, I'm trying to be tolerant to those who doesn't share my knowledges, my views. It's okay, it's fine. And I will try to do my best just to prove that I'm right. If I will not be able to prove it, okay, it's not a problem. Time comes and we will see who was right in this situation. One of the main goals of our coalition is to say to the world true about the events that happened in Ukraine right now, without embellishment and propaganda, just facts. Facts about war crimes, crimes against humanity. And I believe that the peace and security in our world are fragile, and we must defend them with strict adherence to the principles of international security law. And this is our main goals in our work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go back to the first quote. Wheels of justice grinding slowly but finally. Áaron, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán is trying to suppress and oppress the rights of the LGBTQI+ community in Hungary for a long time now. So how do you believe in justice of those people who are innocent and just trying to live freely?
I believe in justice, but more importantly, I believe in people. And when it comes to the LGBTI community and sexual and gender minorities in Hungary, there is two completely different trends that we see in the last couple of years. Is that we have a government which is stigmatizing and waging a war against the community, using them to present the bad Western influence as pretty much is the same narrative as the Kremlin are using when it comes to gender minorities. But at the same time, the majority of the society is slowly being and becoming more and more acceptable. So one key thing to understand about when it comes to LGBTI rights in Hungary is that there is no public demand for these kinds of legislation.
So government is going basically against the people?
Yes, in a sense. The tricky part is that with all the propaganda and with all the machines that the Hungarian government has, this progressive trend can be turned back. But currently what we see is that people are more and more okay with the idea of same-sex marriage or with the idea of LGBTI people adopting children. This is a very calculated attack on the community, because we know, again, for a fact that for the core supporters of the government, this is something which creates fear. And if you know one thing about Hungary and the current Hungarian government is that they love to tell you the story that Hungary is constantly under attack. It could be asylum seekers, it could be LGBTI people, it could be NGOs, it could be Brussels, it could be whoever. The main point is that we always have to defend ourselves and our values, and portraying these people, the community, as pedophiles and as a threat to children, they immediately invoke a defense mechanism in their core supporters.
I think Evgenia said something like that the aggression comes out of the fear. So do you think this is the same situation kind of in Hungary?
Absolutely, it's fear-mongering. So when you are usually these kinds of populist government are very good in like fighting against non-existent enemies, and sometimes
not fighting the real ones, right?
Yes, and sometimes when there is a real enemy, you know, we see that they are kind of clueless what to do. So it's for many instances it's easier to fight against the so-called gender propaganda or LGBTI propaganda than to tackle real crises and real problems.
Same here.
Sure.
Kind of. How does it feel for people in Hungary to be openly gay or openly queer, openly part of this community right now? What do they face in their everyday reality?
I think especially since last year, in June, when the so-called propaganda law was adopted, which basically banned the so-called portrayal and promotion of homosexuality in media and in schools, there is a significant level of distress and anxiety in the community. So it's quite understandable that if people feel that their core identity is under attack and they are not welcomed and they are not equal in their own country, that creates stress and creates anxiety. And this is exactly what has happening. It's not started last year, so to some extent this war or this campaign against LGBTI people has started years ago, but definitely escalated in last year and basically peaked with the referendum and the campaign upcoming to the referendum, which was in April.
How does the Rainbow Coalition try to help exactly those people? How does your work look like?
you know, the idea behind the referendum was that an already adopted law that let's have a referendum to kind of create artificially a public support for a law. And what we realized, I think, as the Rainbow Coalition was that we need to get out from this defensive position. So we need to tell a very different story. In Hungary, when it comes to human rights defenders and protection of human rights, most of the cases, the reaction, you react to things that the government does. But here the idea was more, let's go in attack mode and let's show the people that what the government is saying is actually not true. So we actually kind of did what the government used to do, is that we did a lot of surveys, and we looked into a lot of surveys before the campaign. We conducted value-based surveys in Hungary, which reaffirmed that this campaign has to be about family, and this campaign has to feature prominently non-LGBTI people who has LGBTI relatives or friends. And I think the novelty of such campaign was that we were featuring mothers and grandmothers and colleagues and friends who were legitimately worried that their loved ones will be attacked on the street or they will lose their job because they belong to the community. And by using them as spokesperson for the community, we also, I think, engaged a lot of people who would otherwise wouldn't engage, not necessarily because they are homophobic or transphobic, but because they thought that this is not my problem. But when you point out that you actually have a relative, or you actually have a colleague that you like, or you actually, your neighbor is in this mess, and the very simple thing that you have to do is go and vote invalid. I think that resonated really well. It was a very simple action. It didn't take much from people, and I think many people understood that this is the bare minimum which I can do.
Does it happen often that someone changes their mind just because of the personal story they encountered?
I think, I mean, I'm not sure the definition of often, but we definitely had feedbacks from the audience, and definitely because of this approach, we definitely had those feedbacks that, you know, I wasn't homophobic, but I thought that this has nothing to do with me. But now, looking at these people and hearing these stories, I kind of feel responsible for my country and for the community. So I think, yeah, definitely helped.
There's also huge propaganda for kids, like let's say aimed at kids in the even maybe kindergartens or the elementary school. Even fairy tales in Hungary are anti-queer. So is this also something that you focus on, or that should be more put focus on, like this anti-queer propaganda in schools?
Yeah, we have a human rights education department, so we are exactly one of the organizations which are now banned from schools or not allowed to go into schools. So yes, like education and talking about the rights of LGBTI people, but human rights in general is one of the core things we do. And when it comes to censorship, and when it comes to not allowing certain contents or certain topics in schools, we are also fighting against that, because it's proven that, you know, if you talk about discrimination, bullying, harassment with students in schools, that that is the one that actually prevents bullying in schools. And while if you don't talk about these things, there is a higher chance that for example, students will bully each other. I don't see how hearing about people, hearing about sexual and gender minorities would turn anyone into gay, which is the biggest fear of the Hungarian government. Actually, talking about these issues only makes our schools and only makes our public life safer for all.
Another thing, external support. Members of the European Parliament have recently claimed that Hungary is no longer a democracy to them because of the anti-LGBTQI+ steps, and they suggested some concrete steps against the Hungarian government, such as limiting their access to EU funds. Do you think this would be efficient? Are you waiting for something like this?
It's a tricky one because it's definitely welcome that the EU is even a bit slower than I would like. Took an interest a couple of years ago in what's going in Hungary, and actually I feel that they are trying to catch up. And so far it seems that the conditionality mechanism and these talks and setting these criteria are definitely the most effective tools from the EU what we've ever seen. But there is an open question which I cannot answer right now, and that is whether the EU wants real changes implemented in Hungary, or it will be happy with just superficial laws and superficial legislation. So far, it seems that the Hungarian government is trying to push through some new legislations that are definitely better than the non-existent one before. But the problem in Hungary is never with the text of the law. So under current legislation, if the Hungarian authorities would want to come after corruption, or if they wouldn't want to persecute LGBTI people, they could very easily do that. So I'm not a huge believer in that some new laws and new promises to the EU will solve a problem. It's more about the practice than the text itself. But definitely, I think the EU is on the right path to do whatever they can do. But it's also important to realize that the EU cannot change Hungary by itself, and it's simply not their job to do that.
Thank you. To follow up before we move to your questions, Denis, do you feel enough support from either European Union or other international structures or communities for Ukraine right now?
For the whole Ukraine?
For the whole Ukraine, yeah.
It's a difficult question. I think that I would say that we have not enough weapon for the fight, and probably that is at least the one thing that I will say that we would like to receive more support. Also, it would be better if we will have a mutual decision on justice mechanism to bring into responsibility those who is responsible. So, of course, Ukraine can find solutions for justice on national level, and we have it, but it would be better if we will establish something which is on international level, just at least to say that when Ukraine win, it will not be the win of Ukraine, but it will be the win of the whole Europe. So I would say about it just now.
Thank you. So there is the space for your questions right now. If there are any, we would be happy to give you the space to ask. So if there is any question, please raise your hand and you will get a microphone. no question. Don't be afraid. Okay, it seems like there is no question, so I will continue. I wanted to talk about the propaganda a little bit more. You've both mentioned it, actually, in, of course, different surroundings, different issues. But it seems like that it is getting stronger rather than weaker, actually. Do you agree with that? And what concrete steps we can maybe all do against this? Áaron, you can start.
Hungary is special and not special when it comes to propaganda because for years now the whole Hungarian public media service has been taken by the government. So literally everything from public TV to public radio to online channels, plus the government has around 500 different media outlets which have been turned into one single propaganda machine. It serves two purposes: A, to echo whatever the government says without any question or without any kind of fact check, and this is the more terrifying thing, to echo Russian propaganda. So there are great studies out there. It's very visible how the Hungarian public media and pro-government outlet has been utilized to basically spread Kremlin-based or Kremlin-originated propaganda all over the country. And this is important because I'm a huge fan of public media. B, public media is pretty much the one only source that a lot of people have in Hungary. So even if we can list hundreds of social media channels or online news sites, people mostly outside of cities living in smaller villages, public media and public TV and public radio are the one and only channel of information for them. So I would start with taking back public media. And I think that's probably one of the most crucial things that in Hungary we can do. Obviously education, which is probably the most important, but that takes a long time to people to realize what is fake and what is not. But also in general, just good education and critical thinking. That's what will, I hope, solve this problem.
One follow-up question. Are there any free, non-oppressed media in Hungary?
Yes, there are. There are a few, mostly online. We still have one relatively free independent daily newspapers. We have a couple of online sites. And we have one commercial TV channel, which is a German-based TV channel, which has a decent 30 minutes news segment. So pretty much that's the Hungarian free media right now. So if you can use the internet, and especially if you speak languages, you can get information. So it's not like a black box. But if you don't have that privilege, basically what you can have is no information or information by the government. And that is the real problem.
And those media you've mentioned, they're not mainstream, right? They are more like niche alternative.
No,
it's free media.
They are free, but since they are not getting any kind of state advertisement or any kind of advertisement at all, they are, experimenting with having subscribers and basically some of their contents being not free of charge. That's also something that I think it's not just a Hungarian trend, that we readers have to acknowledge that news and the informations are not for free anymore. So it's like the whole thinking has to shift. That I definitely used to think that like news and information and reading a good article is like a free of charge thing, and it's simply not. We can have an argument, a debate whether it's good or not, but it's simply not the case.
Thank you. Still no questions? There's two questions emerged, so can we pass the mic to them, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
You have it. Yes,
okay,
I do. We do.
I would like to begin with the observation, which is that all of the Václav Havel Human Rights laureates so far have been human rights defenders in authoritarian regimes. And perhaps that reflects Václav Havel's own legacy, right? But his other legacy is being a human rights defender in a very new and fragile democracy. And so that makes me think a lot about how you see the role of human rights organizations in your own, well, not democracies per se, but the attempts to build a free and democratic Ukraine, to reaffirm democracy again in Hungary. Can this be achieved without human rights organizations? And what is your role in that?
So this is a question for Áaron, right?
But also for Denis, I guess.
It's my strong belief that the democracy, at least in Ukraine, is almost impossible without civil society and public organizations, human rights defenders. In our history, we had a lot of problems with violence of human rights, and the public organizations played a huge role in defending these human rights. And even now, I think that such public organizations like those who are members of our coalition provides a huge assistance to government officials, enforcement agencies in Ukraine to advocate necessary decisions and to provide a due investigation of crimes committed. So from my perspective, involvement of public organizations in every democracy is very important. There is no democracy without public organizations or public activists. It reflects the freedom of speech. And I'm proud to say that in Ukraine, this is the best freedoms that we have. We can say everything that we want in social media or on the street about everyone, even about president, about state officials. And we are not in risk to be jailed. And it's what public organizations do it. Of course, sometimes we are criticized, but it's better when we have, when the critique is constructive. So, thank you for the question.
Yes, everything what Denis said, plus I think for many years human rights NGOs in Hungary had this like mission that we here to document. We here to document and hold the perpetrators and hold the government accountable. I think that's very, very important. But in situations like in Hungary, I think human rights organizations need to step up and be a bit more proactive in organizing movements, organizing people, making people capable of organizing for themselves. So it's not necessarily that, we have to do everything, but like I think we can definitely make better coalitions. We can definitely make, can enable people to organize themselves, and I think we are doing relatively poorly at that front currently, and I hope that we can change that, and that will bring to a more stable democracy. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We had one more. Do we have time for this? Okay. Yeah. So one more question.
Okay. Hello. My name is Mr. Demeter. I want to ask you if you work with some opposition in Hungary, and what's the situation with the opposition in Hungary?
Opposition politician or
parties?
Yeah. Yes. Let's say we had we had a respected or respectable relationship when it comes to the campaign. My personal impression was with the oppression that they thought that this topic, the LGBTI topic, is a bit too risky, and they would lose supporters and voters if they would engage more. So like the opposition didn't really took any part in the referendum campaign. In general, there is an opposition. There are opposition parties in the parliament, but as far as I see, they don't really have one single shared vision for Hungary, and this is actually quite hard to tell who wants what. And I don't think that an average Hungarian could tell the difference between the Hungarian opposition parties. So they are there, but they are fragmented. Also, they are playing on a very uneven playing field where basically all the resources have been put to the government. So I wouldn't blame them too much, but I would blame them a little.
Let's end by blaming. No, is there any other question? Yeah, one more question.
This question is for both of you, but more towards Mr. Demeter, as you did say that the role of information is quite crucial, and that in Hungary there is a lot of information being coveted. I wanted to ask, what on an individual role can we do to kind of uncovet the information and reveal it more and basically spread more awareness, and while governments are oppressing this information and the spread of information?
You mean as someone from outside of Hungary? What? Outside of Hungary. I think what you can help with is definitely you can spread whatever reliable organizations and reliable news outlets and reliable politicians are telling you. And definitely, I think if you don't believe what you hear about from the Hungarian government, I think that's a good start. Obviously, the best I think we can currently do is that but it's mostly going to Hungarians, is we have to put our own money into funding those sites and funding those outlets and funding those people who actually trying to speak the truth. And what these sites are trying to do with our money, which I think it's great, is that they are trying to make people who don't have money or don't have access to this information, trying to give these people an access. It's not, it won't change the whole system, but it will definitely mean something in the long run. I think what people outside of Hungary can do, definitely, and it's not just about information, is you have to realize that what has happened in Hungary and what is happening in Hungary can very well happen in your country. And in some countries already happened to a different level. So I think if you really want to help Hungary, don't let happen this in your own country. And I think, like, my country is a quite good case study. You can see the red flags and the warning signs. And Russia is actually an even better case study in that sense. So if you manage to hold your position in your own country, that helps us, because that also, it doesn't normalize what Hungary is going through. Thank you.
Good punchline, closing punchline. Don't let the evil prevail in your country. Thank you very much. It was Áaron Demeter and Denis Rabomizo. Thank you so much for being here and for your great work. Thank you. Yeah.